Because time is limited, I would like to get started without further ado. Today we have invited the president of GPIF, the largest pension fund in the world, Mr. Miyazono. Geopolitically, we're in turbulent times. What is the role of GPIF? What its future direction is going to be? Those are the questions that I would like to ask. You are managing assets worth 200 trillion yen. Indeed, GPIF is the largest pension fund in the world. If you could please explain the basic role of GPIF. Well, here in Japan, we have this pension system here in Japan, which is paid for by the workers. So workers fund the pension system, which is distributed to the pensioners. So it is supported intergenerationally. And I think this type of system is quite common around the world. Here in Japan, society is aging rapidly and birth rate declining very fast. So that the burden on the part of the workers becomes not too large. So we are accumulating funds on a reserve to be distributed as pensions. And so managing the assets in the reserve is what we do as well. So the amount of assets that we manage through the reserve is 200 trillion yen. And this is worth 4 years of pension disbursement. So we have this huge buffer. And internationally speaking, I think we are one of the few with such a large reserve that is managed on the order of 200 trillion yen. And for this buffer, well, according to its design, we're going to continue managing this for 50 years. And what is the management policy, the investment policy? Well, we're going to accumulate funds in the reserve and continue managing it for 50 years. So huge amounts of money are going to be managed and invested for such a long time. So we need to distribute assets around the world from a long-term point of view, a very orthodox approach, long-term distributed investment. That is the style that we have, which is orthodox. And geopolitical risks, ESG, I think this will have an impact on the risk that these factors have on the market. Now, with respect to asset management, GPIF is a market participant as well as a public institution. We have two sides. So, given your profile, how are you conducting asset management? Well, in terms of asset management, so that it does not have direct impact on the financial market and corporate behavior, we are commissioning asset managers to have our assets managed. And so that is according to law. And aside from a handful of domestic bonds, for bond investment, fixed income investment as well, we entrust our assets to the asset managers for fixed income investment. So collaboration with such asset managers becomes key. And what's been the track record? Since 2001, we have started investment into market. It's been 20 years since. On an annual basis, the rate of return is 3.56%, and cumulative profit is 102 trillion. So, are you satisfied with these numbers as president? 3.56% of rate of return. MHLW minister has mandated us to have a return of inflation plus 1.7%. That is the return that we're tasked to achieve, and 3.56% is well above that. So I think we are making viable contribution, good contribution to pension funds. So you have a huge a fund, you're called as a whale in the financial markets. You have such a large presence, and the market is always paying attention to what GPIF is doing. Russia has invited into Ukraine. Geopolitical risks are rising in the world. And how do you intend to respond to that? Well, we are a long-term investor. From various points of view, we are analyzing a variety of risk indicators. And geopolitical risks, when it comes to that, through impact on financial markets, they could threaten the stability of asset management for funds like us. So the basic approach is to manage exposure by country and to understand country risk. When an incident occurs, we need to understand what developments are taking place in the financial system or the financial markets. As far as Russia is concerned, from the viewpoint of risk management, we have suspended making new investments into Russia. For the assets that we have already invested in Russia, it's very difficult to trade them on the market. But taking certain opportunities, to the extent possible, our policy is to divest them as much as possible. So as a long-term investor, how are you viewing Russia's aggression into Ukraine? This is my personal view. But since the Cold War ended between the East and the West, the international order that was built by the West and countries like Japan have come to a major turning point. So U.S.-China conflict, spread of pandemic, because of these factors, supply chain has been disrupted, and already globalization is having a setback, as people say. And Russia's aggression into Ukraine could possibly accelerate such trends. And globalization may lead to increased gap between the rich and the poor. There are such negative sides. But on the other hand, it could facilitate global growth and stabilize prices. No doubt those have been the benefits. But going forward, assumptions of such benefits may change drastically, just in case, or rather, from just in time to just in case. There's a shift being made in terms of thinking. And that could lead to cost increases in the supply chain. And GPIF invests in global capital markets. And it means that these could bring about greater uncertainties in such markets. And so amidst such circumstances, how can we continue to achieve stable return? And this may sound simple, but we would like to continue to take a long-term perspective and achieve diversification in our international investment. That is our basic principle, and we will continue to stick to that principle, which we think is important. So always keep a long-term perspective. But then turning to the market of late, financial tightening is taking place, and yen depreciation is also shaking the market. How do you view them? Well, I said that we take a long-term view. Well, we're on a very long journey. We're like a huge ship on a long journey. So there are waves and winds that may blow, and depending on the weather conditions, we'll have to stabilize the position of the vessel. So we need to have such meticulous risk management from time to time, and yet not lose sight of the path that we are proceeding on. So the overall picture is also important. So we need to manage our risks from both perspectives. So at any time, a long-term perspective becomes a key, I guess. And Prime Minister Kishida is touting a new form of capitalism. And what about investment into a venture, capital venture funds? That is considered as a possibility, but what is GPIF's view on that? So venture investment into the infrastructure, such alternative investment is a very promising investment area. Well, since a few years ago, we have been engaging in it quite actively. But such areas require expertise. And what is most important is to take time to source deals, to perform due diligence on the transaction or the project. And you need to have very careful monitoring. It takes time. For the investment to mature, it does take time and expertise. So that is something that we would like to continue to work on steadily. And what the government is saying is that we long-term investors in startup companies and infrastructure, the government is willing to create an enabling environment for such investments for us to take place. And that is our interpretation of the message, which we welcome as an investor. But we are a public institution. We're not making investments for a very specific policy objective. That is not our mission. And I don't think that is what is expected of us from the general public. Right. It's almost time to close, so moving on to the last theme.
Is about ESG investment. That is my final question. As a Japanese pension management organization, GPIF, you have been active in that. Could you introduce what are your achievements so far? As a universal owner, 6,000 equities and 14,000 types of bonds. We are investing a broad range of methods. So in terms of ESG, we don't know when we may encounter ESG risks. So we are investors looking from a very conservative perspective about ESG risks. To have a stable growth will lead to our long-term return and stable return. So that is a requirement that we believe is necessary. So in that sense, we are active in ESG investments. In terms of equity, 8 ESG index, we are making investments. More than 12 trillion yen is our balance. Besides that, in our total asset, ESG factors are taken into consideration. That is our investment policy in making investments. So I said that investment is being commissioned. So we ask that company, we are asking to make our investments, to have constructive dialogue, to have constructive engagement with the companies that we are making investments into. And that is also built in our standards to evaluate the investment manager. In the geopolitical risks that was mentioned earlier, currently, stable supply of energy, I think, is being focused. So what are future prospects about ESG investments? People may wonder about it. Could you tell me something about it? As was mentioned earlier, because of Russia's invasion into Ukraine, in the European countries, there is a serious anxiety, concern about stable supply of energy, and there's stagnation of introducing carbon neutrality, and focus is now shifting back to fossil fuel. There are such concerns seen, but in the area of ESG investment, in the short term, the risk-return situation is changing. However, for investors, climate change, no matter how distributed and how diverse your investment, events may happen simultaneously, so you cannot enjoy the effect of diversified investment. And in the long run, there will be impact of climate change. So for long-term investors, there will always be an impact. So within ESG, this is something that is different in terms of a type of risk. So we have to seriously confront these risks. And in the world, the need of decarbonization and to achieve the target of carbon neutrality remains unchanged. And in terms of energy security, focus on renewables. This trend will rather accelerate going forward. Thank you very much. So we are running out of time, but at the end, in the following panels, there's going to be discussions about the future of ESG investments in Japan. So about the future that you envisage, could you tell me something about it? From 2016, we have been engaged in ESG investments and ESG activities. But now, ESG investment is something taken for granted. It's normal, and companies are engaged in ESG activities and they make disclosures. This is already happening in general. So the social return of ESG and economic returns of investment, the correlation is heightened. Under such a situation in the future, to have a real, meaningful, and sound ESG investment, and to continue with such an investment, the standard for us to make investment decisions, that is, the standard of disclosure, must be unified globally. I hope that will happen. Thank you very much. So, time was very short, but thank you very much for your participation. Thank you.